Why do you think this is good news? And do you believe it is the real deal? Export compliant only costs $5-6 million?
No, of course, in spite of the restrictions, probably got more GPU, NVIDIA, and otherwise. They didn't use 5K, probably 100,000. R&D costs were much more, and so on and so on. Still, it's not a 20x improvement, maybe it's a 2 or 3x. But my point was that if this is true, even to a 2-3x extent, is one of the biggest total factor productivity increases in human history, literally, and should be increasing potential growth, not just in China. The reinforced learning can be used by everybody. It's open source, so everybody's going to use it. And it's going to increase also not only the productivity of those who are producers of AIs, but more importantly of the consumers of AIs. So if it's really true, and I think it's an iterative process, we all learn from each other, we all distill from each other within the US, between China, US, and others, it increases the fact that AI is going to change the world for the better. There'll be a significant increase in potential growth in the United States and also globally. So over the medium term, this should be actually positive for US and global stock markets, not negative. So the reaction, I think, initially on Monday was totally excessive. And the fact that now there's been some retracing over the week as people are digesting this news and saying this is not the shock that we thought it was.
Positive for stocks, positive for the economy, for economic growth. Do you think it's positive for society?
Well, there's been a huge debate about what are the risks of AI as opposed to the benefits of AI. I think in part is a political and philosophical question. We know misinformation, disinformation, risk of increased cyber warfare, eventually risk to humanity and so on. But I would say on net, AI, like any other technological innovation, is going to lead to an increase in both productivity growth, potential growth, and human welfare. We may be able to live until not 90, 100, 120, longevity, health, you name it. So it's a benefit to society overall. And there are side consequences and problems and risk, and we have to manage them. And I think that the regulation of AI is going to be very complicated. Probably like the internet, we're going to do it too little, too late, and then we're going to realize there are some mistakes.
If I clipped what you just said and used some AI and took out some words and replaced AI with globalization, weren't we saying the same thing a few decades ago?
Well, globalization that is being bashed right now by everybody led to an increase in huge amounts of welfare for billions of people around the world, 2.5 billion Indians and others and so on, and even in advanced economies. So trade and globalization and technology are the same thing, is a ways of increasing productivity growth. There'll be a backlash, but I think that, and the backlash is going to come on AI, is that there'll be massive amounts of job displacement. Job augmentation will be initially, but then job substitution and replacement is going to be. And then there'll be UBI or other things to resolve it.
Will AI do to services what globalization did to manufacturing is a question I keep going back to. How many people are going to be satisfied with just UBI? I don't want to sit at home, do nothing and get paid by the government. We aspire as human beings to be better, to improve, to climb the social ladder. A lot of people
Let's put it this way. In a world of scarcity, of course, the dignity of life was to provide for yourself and for your family and go and look for water, food, shelter every day. In a world in which scarcity becomes less of a constraint, we have to produce less because the robots are going to do it and we can consume more. You're right that you guys are saying, what's the meaning of life in that situation? It's a philosophical question. And John Maynard Keynes in the 30s said, once we get this technology innovation, everybody's going to work only 10 hours rather than 60 hours, and we'll become poets, artists, creators, and whatever not. Maybe the nature of life is going to change. Maybe with AGI, we have to merge with the machine, because if we don't merge with the machine, they become hyper-intelligent and we become obsolete. And then there's going to be a new species. It's not going to be Homo sapiens, but Homo roboticus. But it's going to take decades. Those are important philosophical questions, but I would argue provocatively that 20 years from now, potential growth probably could be 8%, and unemployment rate could be 80%. We are going in that direction over time, and then we have to manage the consequences. And UBI, by the way, cannot be only national, because the winners and losers are not going to be only internal, but also across countries. Those who innovate get better off compared to those who don't innovate. Can we have a system of global governance that has cross-border UBI? I mean, those are big issues.
Global governance.
Well, a form of global governance, cooperation. We have international...
You can't even, if you use DeepSeek today, you can't even find out things about the Chinese Communist Party, things like Tiananmen Square.
Yeah,
How are we supposed to have global governance with these kind of countries?
I think what's going to happen is that over time, given the geopolitical divisions between US and China, the world is going to be divided in two. There'll be a group of countries, US with its friends and allies, and others in the global south who prefer the economic, monetary, social, political, geopolitical system of the US and the West. Some in the global south are going to go with us, and there'll be others going to go with the model of China. Both model economic, trading, state capitalism, geopolitical, security, BRI, technology, and whatever not. And there'll be a split world. But within the West, if there are, and those friends and allies, if there are winners and losers within countries or across countries, we'll have a system of transfers. I mean, we've been subsidizing the defense of our friends and allies from Asia to Europe for now 80 years because it was in the global interest of the United States. So if we need to do global UBI across friends and allies and others part of our system, we're going to do it. But that's the world we're going. And China is doing the same thing. We have to subsidize our friends and they'll do the same.
I'm petrified of the world you describe. I want nothing to do with it.
And Lisa's not here, and it's gone very existential. Lisa's not even here, and it's gone very existential, this conversation. When it comes to this idea of, all right, global regulation on AI, do you think Trump will use AI right now in the next 4 years as a bargaining chip as he tries to work on global realignment when it comes to trade?
He will. Actually, Biden, right before he left in early January, had this new AI diffusion rule that divides essentially the world in three groups of countries, Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. If you are part of the global technological order of the United States and you accept all the rules and the security, you have access to unlimited amounts of advanced chips of NVIDIA and others. You have access to all the AI models. You can have access to building the data center, and you're part of our own technological sphere. And we set the rule of essentially who is in that type of Tier 1. We are deciding unilaterally. It's not a question about regulating AI, but who is our friend and ally. And even within NATO, there are only so far 18 countries that qualify for Tier 1. Not all NATO countries do. Of course, the countries in the Big Five I are part of it. Some of the other NATO members. Plenty of countries are not. Tier 2 is mostly the global south and everybody else.
Yep.
And of course, China, our rivals, are Tier 3 and so on. So the US is going to set the rules of the global technological order. And it's going to do it totally unilaterally. And it's either you are with me, because I'm setting those technologies, and I'm the one who's advancing those technologies, then you can use the chips, you can develop the application, you can do the data center with me, or otherwise you're in the doghouse.
I wanted to squeeze in one more question. The Europeans would be deeply upset. Europeans would be deeply upset with this conversation, I'm sure.
No, but they already accepted it. The same thing happened with data centers, right? They tried to find an alternative. They were not successful. And the hyperscalers are providing those data centers in Europe. And maybe they are technically in Europe, but they're controlled by AWS and Microsoft and you name it.
I'm against the clock.
That's already the world we're in.
I wanted to squeeze in a word on Stephen Moran, just quickly.
Yeah.
Worked alongside him at Hudson Bay Capital, who you represent this morning. Published a really interesting paper at the end of last year about activist treasury issuance, ATI.
Yeah.
Now, he's in power now. He's in the White House, working alongside Donald Trump as an economic advisor.
Yeah.
What's going to happen now? If you believe that Janet Yellen, the former Treasury Secretary, was issuing treasuries actively at the front end to have different objectives, how do we unwind that this time around? Do we even try?
Well, Scott Bessent, in his confirmation hearing, was asked about this, and he already said that effectively, given the impact on long-term interest rates, if you phase it out right away, it's going to be a shock to long bond yields already going higher. In our paper, we estimated the shock could be, for the next 2 or 3 years, at least 50 basis points. So they know that. So they're going to have to wait and phase it out, one, gradually, and two, in their view, when bond yields are going lower, either going lower because maybe growth is slower or because inflation is lower. So they'll have to opportunistically, gradually phase it out over time. But it's not going to happen overnight, and they've already said so.